Right, so, hello, welcome back, guys. This is KRS Speaks Boxing, episode 5, and I'm proud to be joined by Frank Gilfeather. He's a renowned journalist. He's a former Scottish lightweight amateur champion, and he's also a TikTok star and a coach in Aberdeen. How are you today?
I'm very well. Nice to be with you today, Christian. All your fans, your boxing fans on this channel. Nice to be with you.
Oh, I appreciate that, Frank. I think so I'm catching up with you because your TikTok is doing brilliantly. So,
Yeah.
to be fair, we could start there. So, tell us a bit about why you started your TikTok page.
Well, it's actually almost exactly a year. It was a year ago last week that I was in a gym, a local gym up here in Aberdeen in Scotland. And there's a young boy called Gregor McPherson who's had 3 professional fights. Now, at that time, a year ago, he was about to make his debut. He's a lightweight and he's got great potential. He has his 4th fight coming up on September 9 here in Aberdeen. But the point of the point of the TikTok, how did that start? Well, we were down there training. My son Paul and I were training, and Gregor's dad, who is also his coach, he said, "Have you spotted anything that you could pick up on what Gregor's doing?" And I said, "Yeah, let me." So I went into the ring with him, and I explained a couple of things. Mainly, one of the main things was how to get himself out of a corner or away from the ropes. Things, the defensive stuff. Unknown to me, Paul, my son, was filming it. And afterwards, he said, "I'm going to put this on TikTok." I'd heard of TikTok. I didn't have a TikTok page or anything like that. And I said, "Yeah, feel free." And you know what? So it took off. So a year ago, last week, we had something like 420 followers. Today, we've got 102,000 because the interest was so great and the comments were so encouraging and complimentary that every time we went to the gym, which was 3 times a week, we'd record some videos. And it was clear to me that what I was offering, which was my expertise and my experience, was welcomed by people who are watching. And so I was encouraged by that. And we continue to do it. And today it's been fantastic. Only thing is, we're constantly thinking about what to do. What will we do today? What the thing is, you've in boxing, like other sports, you've often got to keep repeating the message. Because as I found when I used to do some coaching at a boxing club here in Aberdeen, another one, and I found that many of the kids, and I'm talking about kind of 12 to 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, would get the message, but they couldn't take it in. Too many of them. So they would go back to their old habits because that was comfortable for them.
I think that we've noticed that in, say, like, even when we watched Deontay Wilder, when he fought Fury the 3rd time, he was trying to change his whole style in that gap. And then once he had his moments, but then it was straight back to his sort of footwork and it all changed back. So I suppose people do it from like comfortability because they're finding the change too hard, and then they just revert back to type almost.
That's what happens, and I remember one kid, lovely kid, he was a southpaw, and he lacked a bit of rhythm, and a bit of flexibility. Yeah. He was a bit rigid, a bit uptight, and I'm trying to relax him and tell him, what to do specifically on 1 or 2 punches, and he would do it. Then I would walk away and go and work with another young boy, and somebody else, then somebody else. Then I'd go back to the first guy, and I find that he was back doing what he'd done originally. And so I began, I was thinking, hang on, is it me or is it them, And eventually I've had to say to some kids, I've now taught you that same thing, 15, 20 times. And every time I go away and come back, you're back to what you were doing originally, making your same mistake. And so I kind of lost heart a bit. And even now, you know, so I'm not coaching now.
Yeah.
If you like, my coaching audience are the people on TikTok. And the great thing is that people, you've said it yourself, you've picked up on some things and you've tried them out and they've worked for you. And that's great. And that makes me happy. But you know, it's really difficult if you've got a kid that's been at boxing for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and their mistakes haven't been recognized by their coach, haven't been picked up, then they will continue with these bad habits. And so what you get is you get a kind of boxer who goes into competition and he's not quite got it right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and I say this, and I know what people will be saying, he's just an old guy who's living in the past. But the fact of the matter is, for me, standards then come down. So I blame the coaches. So if I'll give you a little story. This previous boxing club I used to do some coaching at, I used to go up there, and there was an 8-year-old boy who was a Romanian kid. And he had, you know, at that age, you never expect him to be boxers. But the fact is, they're coming into something, a boxing club, to which they feel part. And they think, well, I'm part of this boxing club and I'm loving it. And they love the atmosphere and all that kind of thing. Excuse me.
That's all right.
So you encourage them. And I'd go in and he'd be waiting for me and say, can we have a spar? And I'd take him in the ring. Now, that was a big deal for an 8-year-old kid. He's in the boxing ring. And I'd get down to his level. And of course, I let him thump me like mad, you know. But I'm taking it on the gloves and, you know, letting him whiz past. But it was a thrill for him. So, and that was a great thrill for me as well, because I'm thinking, well, this kid's loving what he's doing. He might never, ever be a boxer. But the point I'm making is this, Chris. I said to him, right, take your gloves off. Take his gloves off. Let me see you with your closed fist. And he had it like that. And his thumb, I don't know if you could see that.
Yeah.
His thumb was sticking out there, right? Now, that kid and many others like him will be going to gyms all over the world. And the coach hasn't even said, this is how you... Yeah, that's your fist, right? So they're going into it like this, and there's what we were speaking about. They've picked up a habit which they will then find it difficult to eradicate.
Right.
And all these things play into boxing. My big thing, as you know, because you watch the videos, is what I call slapping, punching with the inside of the glove. Now, I've tried to theorize this. I stayed away from boxing for a long time, and then I went back to keep fit.
Yeah.
I was keeping fit for about, 10 years or whatever. And then they would say to me at the boxing club, they would get busier and busier. Do you want to help out with the coaching? And then the coaching was great. I loved it. I found that it was kind of eating my time to keep fit, and I had no time. But the point I'm making is that over time, I noticed all these kids were coming and using sparring gloves on the punch bag. And that got me thinking. And I started using them. It was okay, fine. But I preferred the old style boxing mitts for the punch bag. And that got me thinking, why are these kids slapping? Why aren't they turning and punching with a knuckle part of the glove? Now, when I boxed, and it should be still the same, I guess, that was an illegal punch. And if you did that, then you were stopped by the referee and you were warned. You're slapping. And if you did it again and again, you could be disqualified. So what brought it to a head for me is that a boxing brand, I won't mention them, they're based in England. They sent me three pairs of beautiful boxing gloves, right? training and sparring ones, and they look. One was light blue metallic, one was black and gold, the other one was all red. And I thought and what they said to me is, have them, wear them on the punch bag and so on. I said, fine. So I wore them, and I found that my hand was like this. I couldn't control what was going on. I couldn't control. It was so rigid.
Tight, yeah.
Yeah. And I couldn't close my fist. But I went ahead and I thought, that's nice of these people to send me these gloves. I started punching. I'm waking up in the middle of the night with sore fingers and knuckles. I'm thinking, how did that happen? Mm-hmm. And that's why you might know, I've now kind of thought this through and brought out a pair of bag mitts which are hybrid between the boxing glove and the old style mitts. But the key thing is this. I'm not letting you get a word in, am I?
Oh no, go for it. Yeah, it's good.
The key thing is this. It's this bit here, the thumb, right?
Because a lot are attached, ain't they? No,
So if the thumb, as you know, is boxing gloves, proper boxing gloves. They're attached to the main body of the glove. So you don't have any control. They control you. This is back to the old style mitt. All that in the inside is old style mitt. Yeah. And the outside is 8 ounce padding. Yeah. Right. So I'm on a mission. I want to get kids coming in to boxing and learning how to punch properly. But more importantly, Chris, I want the coaches to recognize or ask themselves the question, am I doing this right?
100%. I think we've got a lot of, not to put anyone down, but I think there's a lot of coaching now that it is just for show. We see a lot of pad men, we see a lot of people. It looks really good, but tactically, I don't know about throwing 6 punches at someone, because it's hard to, you got to time someone, you got to walk someone into something. It's finding that. And then to your point, even with the gloves, I noticed that when I brought one of my first pairs of gloves, I'd always trained in mitts before that. So that's what my dad gave me, and that's what we always sort of stuck to. And I noticed, and I thought, in my head, I'm thinking, do you cut this with the scissors or like that? But I got stuck. I just used them because I thought, this must be. I was about 14, 15, and that's what we was using. And I stuck with them ever since until now. When I was telling you, I noticed myself slapping on the bag, and that might be more to the point as well. Like with your gloves, I've noticed them a few times as well. They look really good. You can actually make a fist, and you can dig a bit more. So it's trying to land, I suppose. I noticed with even you on the bag, it's snappy punches, it's snappy, and I suppose we get a lot of people now because of the ounces. People are pushing the bag, and that's why it's going everywhere instead of just snapping and using your body.
You make an interesting point there. You're absolutely right, because the number of people I've had is, you have to point this out to, saying you're not punching, you're pushing.
Yeah.
And so if you and they don't know any other way. This is the problem, right? Yeah. So what bothers me are coaches who are giving the wrong advice, and B, when they've given the wrong advice, they just allow it to continue. So I don't see myself as a coach. I am a teacher, right? I want to teach the correct way to do it. And I'm not one of these guys that goes in the gym and shouts, time, or, come on, lift your hands. I know that I annoy the life out of young boxers, because I stop them and say, what you've just done there is good, but it could be better if you do it this way, that kind of thing. I never want to discourage kids. Yeah. I always want to encourage, but I always want to make them better. You know, the thing that annoys me, and you know what you're going to be speaking about now, is when you switch on YouTube or TikTok and so on, and you see guys that have been proper boxers, amateur and professional, and they're telling, for example, a right cross is a straight right. I was thinking, how can that be? You know, if somebody did that to me in a fight, I think, wow, great, thank you very much for doing that, because I'll just get under it and hit you, you know.
Yeah, you can
but
see
someone hit you with the right cross. I always tell people, I used to be, I still do it for Sky Sports, but I used to be a TV reporter.
Mhm.
And the older you go, and the more experience and so on, you get better. Otherwise, you shouldn't be there. But now I get young people who are going into broadcasting. They come to me and say, "What should it? What should I do?" And I said, "Stop. Go and watch BBC News.
Yeah.
They do it the best. For me, watch what they do and copy them. And
Yeah.
this is really what I would love.
To follow the
I'd love
blueprint
young
almost.
boxers go. But then, Chris,
Mhm.
you could go to the top boxers now and you still see them hitting with the inside of the glove.
Yeah.
So they can't hook properly. They hook this way.
Yeah, the slap.
Yeah. And I thought, well, one day you'll sprain your wrist, you'll hit somebody on the top of the head, and
And
you'll
the
know
hands
that you've
down.
done it wrong. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
100%. I get guilty with the slaps, so I'm trying to turn it over because I always thought turning it over. Andre Ward for me is like, I think he's just sensational technically. Like, if you watch, there's like old sports videos, and he'll be in like a fitness gym, and he's doubling up on the left hand, and then he's turning over the right, but to the body,
Yeah.
and then he comes back up and he turns over with the left hand. So it's always sort of, that's how I always thought turning over. I think might have been against Sullivan Barrera. He catches, then he catches, and he tries to turn over the hook, and it's just I find him terrific to watch as a boxer.
It's terrific, yeah. And you made an interesting point there with regards to defense, right? Here's the other thing. I've got people who follow me will know this.
Yeah.
That I've got a thing about this.
Yeah,
right?
Jabbing high.
Yeah. And I watch these people, there's millions of them on social media, and they're coming, and it's like Strictly Come Dancing. It's like they've choreographed a move which looks good on video, but actually is meaningless. So you've got this, and they're doing this, and straight out here, and this way. And I'm thinking, yeah, that looks good, but it's
not
practicable. Yeah. And so they do these little jigs, and with that foot moving to there and all that kind of thing. That's not boxing. That's keep fit. If you want to learn how to be a boxer, then go and watch the top fighters who are doing it properly. So I've got a thing about the peekaboo style, and I think that's going. I don't know how you can throw a jab from your forehead. And the other thing that bothers me is that when people are on the defensive, they put their hands here. And so I think, well, how can you see where the punches are coming from if you've got your vision is impaired? All that stuff. So listen, it all goes back to the coaching.
Yeah.
What you've got now, Trish, is, and I'll tell you, this is an interesting point for me. If you take an organization like Boxing Scotland, right? You've got Boxing England. I'll give you an example. When I used to train at this previous boxing club, there was an 11-year-old boy who was big, so big for his age, right? He would come to the club. He was very shy. He wasn't very good. But and the reason he wasn't very good is because, like loads of other kids, they were ignored because the more elite boxers in the gym were getting all the coaches' attention. So they were just given a pair of gloves and saying, yeah, get onto it. So they didn't know. So this is how I kind of started. So I thought, nobody's talking to these kids. They're all just coming in. Nobody's saying, welcome, come in, So I started saying, right, this is what you do. I'll show you what to do, and I'll keep an eye on you. And this kid went on to, and this is another issue, this kid went on to win the Scottish Novice Championship as a youth. However, now he's only about 16 or 17 now. And I now learn that he's on phase 2 of his coaching certificate. I'm thinking, hang on, you've probably had no more than 6 or 7 contests. You're 16, and yet Boxing Scotland's going to register you as a coach. How does that work?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I think it has become almost, I think professionals get it straight away, don't they? Obviously they've been professional, but I think a lot of it is now a lot of sports coaching, and I think that's where we're getting. Wow, people look great when they say that you can't put muscles on your chin. They say that, but people do look aesthetically good, and then they've got the coaching stuff behind them because they've got it, and I think that's how it's sort of being pushed through now. Because I've noticed like boxing gyms are really expensive. Like nowadays, like I remember when it was like £1 and you'd go in and it was like a community thing, and that was boxing, and it was rough. The gloves stunk, but that's how it was meant to be. But now
I
it's
agree.
all really like it's really clean. Like I don't know how to put it. Like it's a business model. Yeah, and
Well, you're right. You're right, because our clubs up here charge £2 for kids up to, I think it's 17.
Yeah.
And then the adults pay £3
Oh, so yeah,
for a
not
session.
massive.
Now that's fine. That keeps the club ticking over, because, and I've got to say this: these guys who run amateur boxing clubs are doing it for love.
Yeah.
And they're doing it because they want to help within their own
boxers,
communities.
the people around them. Yeah.
And so we can't begrudge them. What's happened now for me is, I don't know how it is in England, but I'm hearing that it's not very different from what it is in Scotland in terms of the amateur boxing organisation. What happens is it's being run by a board of directors, none of whom have any experience of boxing, virtually none of whom go to boxing shows. There's a chairman and a board of directors, and the coaches and the referees and the judges and the guys that open their boxing clubs every night for their communities are sidelined, and they have no longer any say in how boxing is run. Now that's the dog, the tail wagging the dog, and it's turned on its head, and that has to change.
100%. I mean, I wouldn't know too much about the boards and stuff, but I think even when we look at like professional boxing as well, the judging and people who like they're not even entertaining the sport. Like when you see some of the scorecards, and you think this is who's judging, and then the professional fighter, whether they win or lose, they're going to lose a load of money anyway, which is not what it should be about. They should be getting their fair share because they've been unfairly judged on a competition. Or, I mean, I think it was Mayweather versus Canelo, and it was a majority decision. And like Mayweather, I don't think he lost a round, to be honest. It'd be very hard to see in that fight, and it was he got scored a draw on one of the scorecards. And you think that's like the highest of the sport at that time, especially. And so even at grassroots level, when you look at like that amateurs that get scored, that must be so disheartening. So I think definitely there needs to be a push for more boxers or people in boxing to be involved in those sort of roles.
Yeah, there should be, and ideally there would be, but boxing, like many amateur sports, particularly like also professional as well, there's a level of the politics come into play, and so if your face doesn't fit, if you're outspoken, for example, if you have an opinion, they don't like it. Well, you're marginalised, and whereas I remember it growing up. I mean, I've seen it. My dad ran boxing clubs, for decades. And me and my two brothers were my oldest brother was British youth champion. Dennis, the middle brother, was Scottish light welterweight champion and became a top class, world class refereeing in the Olympic Games and so on. But they were my oldest brother. He quit when he was 16. He did enough, but my middle brother, he was in it to help. He ran a club for years and years and years. He would, they would drive kids for boxing shows all over. Now, there are hardly any boxing shows in the amateur game up here. Now, I don't know how it is down here, but we were boxing. I tell kids now, training kids, and they're coming up for their first fight or the second fight, and they say, how many fights did you have? And I say, about 200. They went, that'd be right. Yeah, sure. And I said, no, you don't understand. I was boxing every week. in somebody's club. So our club would go and visit that club, and we had there was a show and there was an audience, so on. But the other thing is that if you were to win a district or a national title, then it meant you did it 3 times in the 3 fights in the one night.
Yeah.
And they have a semi-final, then they have a rest for a fortnight, and then they go back and fight the final. God, that was, I wish that was around in my day.
Oh yeah, I think I read one of your stories. I think it was a fight against someone called, was it Jim Gibson? And then you fought Evan Armstrong in the Scottish flyweight. I was going to ask about that story, so you could tell us. So you was fighting, was it 3 fights in the one day? And
in the one night. I mean, over a period. What used to happen was to make sure that all the weight divisions were done within I think it was in a couple of weeks. So one night there would be, for example, that one you're talking about, I was featherweight division. So that was in Glasgow. And that same night, the light middleweights would be decided, right? So you had a whole evening of boxing, either featherweight division or lightweight. Now, what happened was that night, I just turned 17. That was the age at which you turned senior. Although I had been given special permission a year earlier because I'd run out of youth opponents. I was given special permission by the authorities to box senior. So I boxed all these men. They were men. They were in their 20s, late 20s, 30s. There was a couple of them in their 30s when I was 16. And I was beating every one of them. And so at the age of 17, I'm now allowed to enter the senior championships. Now I think it's 19 before you're a senior. And so I go, and the main man was Evan Armstrong, who later became the British professional featherweight champion. And he was a big puncher, lovely guy, quiet, unassuming man. And so I know that the way it was seeded, that he and I would meet in the final. But what we didn't reckon on was there was 2 things. It's crazy. It shows you how primitive it was. I left home without my mouth guard, my gum shield. Did you know this story? I didn't know where you got that.
I done a bit of research yesterday, but I thought it'd be brilliant to hear it.
Yeah. And I left without my mouth guard, and I thought, well, now you can't go in for a spar without a mouth guard. They won't allow you to. I said to my trainer, I've left, and he, God, what have you done? It was a special one I had made by the dentist. And I said, it'll be fine. And what happened was, so I boxed a guy called Robert Russell, I think his name was, and I stopped him in the 2nd round. Now, here's an interesting point. We're talking about how to punch properly. My dad, who by then had retired from officiating at boxing, given up boxing, he was at the ringside, and he watched the 1st round, and I looked down to him at the ringside, and my dad is so undemonstrative. He was very calm, very low key, and he looked at me and he put his right fist up, and he did that. That's all he did. So I went out and boxing in the 2nd round, and I could see what he meant. The guy was pulling his left jab back, and it was dropping. So I hit him with the right. Down he went, and he was down twice, and it was stopped. Anyway, that was fine. Armstrong goes in. He stops his guy within the first couple of minutes. Then it's the light middleweight's turn, and then so on. It was going to alternate between the light middleweights and the featherweights. My 2nd fight was against a guy called Jimmy Gibson. There were 2 Jimmy Gibsons in Scottish boxing at the same time. One was called the Golden Boy. This wasn't the Golden Boy. This was the other boy. And he was, oh my God, he was tough. He was a great guy. But in the ring, he'd prop you up with his elbows. You put the head on you. It was elbows. It was a really hard, grueling 3-minute rounds in what was the semi-final. Middleweights go in. Armstrong goes in for his 2nd fight. Bump, the guy's out in the 1st round. So the problem was, I probably had about 45 minutes rest before they said, right, that's it, the final. And I am in boxing Armstrong. And my coach said, now watch out for his right cross. What he didn't say was his left jab was like a thunderbolt hitting you, you know. It was kind of, yeah, it was like almost like in slow motion. He would hit you with his left jab. I'm like, wow. Anyway, I was exhausted. And I can't remember, it was the second or third round. The referee just said, you've had enough, you know. So when I was just done 17, it was my first championship. I was featherweight and I got the silver medal as well. But it's a learning curve, 100%. You know? Yeah.
I think, how did you feel like, you know, when you did win it, you won it in 1965, if I'm right?
Yes.
Was that at lightweight?
At lightweight, yeah.
Yeah, so could you tell us a bit about that story and sort of anyone you was facing at that time? And I was going to ask you as well, this might be a bit too, I'll be a loaded question then. I'll let you go for this and then we'll go, yeah.
Okay, well, the lightweight thing the following year was, I was on the top of my game. But before that, let me tell you a little story, because when I was featherweight, there was another young guy who was Armstrong he went to the European Championships, and then he turned professional after that. Or he'd been to the European Championships in Moscow, one of the two. He turned pro not long after my fight with him. I was featherweight, but I was beginning to edge up in weight. So I was more comfortable about 9 stone 4. I didn't want to declare myself a lightweight. So there was another young featherweight at that time called Ken Buchanan. And so there was this kind of rivalry that who's going to be. I was already boxing for Scotland at featherweight. Excuse me. I'd been to Denmark to box in Copenhagen and a place called Aalborg against the Danish team. And but Buchanan, he's saying, "Well, what about me?" And yeah. So they said, "Okay, we've got to have a match." The match, because it wasn't a championship type thing, they said 9 stone 2 will be the cut-off limit. And I said, fair enough, we can do that. And then I was about 9'4" or something, and I thought, okay, I could lose 2 pounds. However, here's the bizarre thing. I dieted like mad. I trained like mad. I was in the St. Francis Club, which is 65 years old this year, in Dundee. My coach was a man called Jim Brady, who had been the British Empire bantamweight champion at professional. But we didn't have scales in the club. So he had jockey scales in his house. They were ancient. So occasionally we'd go to check the weight. And I went along, we checked the weight. Well, it's fine, it's okay. Anyway, on the night, Leith Town Hall in Edinburgh, 1,200 people, big fight. I weighed in at 8 stone 13. Right. And 9 stone 4 would have been great for me. Anyway, I was beaten on points by Ken Buchanan. We all know he went on to great things, world champion at lightweight, and a great competitor, great fighter. I mean, a fantastic left jab. If any kid ever wants a lesson on how to throw the left jab, he's the guy to look at. So anyway, then I thought, right, now is the time I'll move up. And he and I became teammates in the Scotland team. I moved up to lightweight, and they chose me as a lightweight. In winning the Scottish title, it was in Edinburgh, in the music hall. And again, it was 3 fights. And the guy I boxed in the final was a guy called Hugh Baxter from the Govan Club in Glasgow. And it was straightforward enough. It was comfortable. So, and that meant I went into the ABA quarterfinals. But that I'm not one to kind of rant and rave about being robbed. You know, and that's because twice I won fights where I didn't think I deserved to. But I went to the ABA championship and I boxed a guy called Tommy Wright. I think it was from Doncaster or thereabouts. And this was in Bellevue Arena in Manchester. It was televised. And the great thing for me was that it was televised live. Harry Carpenter was the commentator. And I was told later on, before the result was announced, Carpenter, who was filling in time, had said, that's another win for Scotland against the Northern Counties.
This was in the ABAs, wasn't it?
Yeah, in the ABAs. John McCluskey had won at flyweight. Bobby Mallon had won at bantamweight. Ken Buchanan had won at featherweight. And now it's me. And I'm going into the ring, and the boss of the Scottish Amateur Boxing Associations at then said, you realise you're going to have to knock this guy out to win. And I said, why? He said, because the English judges won't allow a fourth defeat. So I went in, I boxed comfortably, I boxed well. Harry Carpenter had said on his commentary at the end, that's another win for Scotland. Except it wasn't. Split decision this guy got. Now, that was my year. I would have won the ABAs. And I know that now because soon after that, I boxed for Scotland against England at the Kelvin Hall in Glasgow. And a guy called Al White was the ABA champion boxing for England. And I beat him. And I beat him very, very comfortably. And so you get these moments in boxing where it doesn't quite kind of marry up, you know. But that was it. It was fine. And I went to the European Championships in East Berlin.
100%. What was that? I suppose I was going to ask you, it's fair you went on to Ken Buchanan, because I was going to ask, what was it like being around like Ken Buchanan? And I think, is it Dick McTaggart? And he was an Olympic gold medalist, weren't he? What was it like being around those type of people and then traveling and you're all boxing together?
Yeah, well, it's great because Dick McTaggart, firstly, grew up in my town. He was a Dundonian like me. He boxed my two brothers many times, 6 times each, I think, growing up in the youth boxing, right? Dennis won 3, my brother Dennis won 3, he won 3, and so on. And McTaggart was a cool customer. He's such a nice man. And he had this kind of calmness about him where you can almost see the confidence oozing out of him without being big-headed, without having all the kind of look at me kind of thing. He goes to the 1956 Olympics, Melbourne, and wins the gold medal. And suddenly he's on everybody's radar. He won a bronze, actually, in 1960 at Rome. But here's the thing, Chris, he won. No, he had something like 634 contests and lost, I think, around about 31. He won 7 Scottish titles, 5 ABAs, two Commonwealth Games golds, and a European. Now, if you ask anybody at the time, which of those would have been the hardest to win? It was always the European one, because there was no, in the Olympics, you could get lucky with a draw, right? You could meet somebody who's not, what shall we say, from a boxing nation, right? So, you know, maybe one of the Commonwealth countries or something that's not heavily into boxing, and you could get through that way and reach the final. But the Europeans, you didn't get away with that, because you had all these Eastern Bloc countries who produced top quality fighters, and they were men. We were boys. I mean, I went to box in Bulgaria at 18, and we're lining up. We used to line up in the ring before and everybody was introduced, and you were opposite your opponent. And I remember looking at my opponent and saying, "Nah, he's too heavy for me." And I'm looking up the line and I'm shouting to the welterweight, Andy Peast or Tom Embry, the light middle, "I think your guy, you know, he should be up." And this guy heard me speaking, and his name was Stoyan Pilichev. And he was beautifully built, muscular. He was tall for a lightweight, and he beat me on points. And I later discovered that he was a major in the army, and they were all the Bulgarian team were had jobs which allowed them to do full-time training. So we were up again, and he was something like, I was 18, he was something like 25. Now, age doesn't really matter all that much, but it gives you an idea that I was still a boy. He was a mature man.
Yeah.
They'd been up in the mountains for 6 weeks training for us. We'd been working at our jobs during the day and going training 3-4 times a week. So there was an imbalance there. But so McTaggart, McTaggart had this cool exterior. He was confident. He was a southpaw. He was tall for a southpaw, 5'9.5", and that tall in those days for a lightweight, I should say.
Yeah.
He was southpaw. That was an advantage, and he was not brilliant to watch. Yeah. And I contend that southpaws are rarely brilliant to watch. But he was a master of the counterpunch.
Yeah. And
he had this great thing about him where he could make his opponent make the mistake and then counter. He was 1 step, 2 steps ahead of them every time. Buchanan had an incredible engine. He could fight forever. If you look at his fights as a professional, I mean, he's boxing these 15-round fights, and he's still as strong, almost, at the end as he was at the start. Even in the Duran fight, when Duran hit him with a low blow in the 13th round, Buchanan was still going strong. He was behind, but he was still going strong. He had this amazing stamina. And that's what I found when I boxed him. I thought, this guy, I was punching him. He had this long left jab. I was going below it, and I was punching him in the heart, right? So I'll slow him down. Didn't slow him down at all. He was a terrific guy. Great. And he and I became, he was a featherweight then, and I was a lightweight, and he and I became roommates, and we traveled together and all that kind of thing. But let me say one thing about him is he knew his worth. He knew his value. Yeah. He had confidence oozing out of him.
In himself. I think.
Yeah.
Did you ever, absolutely. I think I always heard Josh Taylor speak about him, and then he went to become undisputed. So I was like, always like Ken Buchanan. Even when I watched the Roberto Duran film, because it made sense after, because that's when he won the title, Roberto Duran at lightweight. So it was like, it just made sense. But I was going to ask you, so, like you mentioned before, like your dad was a coach. Am I right in saying he owned the gym that you was training at when you was like, you were sort of coming up, and then your brothers were champions? Was you always sort of thinking boxing is for me?
Do you know what? I never even thought about it in that way. My dad actually wasn't so much a coach. We had the other coach. My dad would be one, and he would just sit down with me at night, and he would say, we should do it. He would just talk. And all the time he's talking about technique, defending yourself, parrying, blocking, all that stuff was going in. Yeah. But he didn't actually have me in the gym on the bags, because he was too busy running the boxing club, and he was the treasurer of the district. He was on the Scottish ABA Council. He became the president of the British ABA. So all this was going on. He was running the show in our area, in our district. But what I took from him was talk about the old fighters, talk about how it should be done, the technique, about the importance of defending yourself, about what to do if you're hurt, what to do if you're exhausted, all that kind of stuff. That stuck with me, stuck with my brothers as well. And the last thing he said, the last thing he always used to say was, if you're not going to do it properly, don't do it. Step away. Yeah. And if there's any sport where that is true, it's boxing. Because you get hurt. Otherwise, you get a sore face, So I was lucky. I had that kind. He was empowering me to do stuff and to do it properly. Yeah.
100%. Oh, that's brilliant. I was going to ask so was it 1952 was your first fight, like in a boxing exhibition? I was going to ask you, what was that like, and how did you feel in that moment?
That was, well, there you are. I was talking earlier about how we used to box every week, right? Yeah. My dad running a boxing show. It was a little boxing show, and it was mainly, well, maybe not mainly, but you'd have youth, you'd have kids in the club. And if kids are training and there's nothing at the end of it.
Yeah.
You know, if they want to box and they'd like to get in the ring and they want to feel the excitement, the thrill of being in the ring with somebody, then they walk away. And you see that often in youth boxing. You know, 15, 16, their pals are going out, they meet girls, that's better fun than going to the gym. You know, so they walk away from it. Or it's too tough. They've had a thump in the face and didn't like it. So we used to, in the district, for example, our club would run a monthly show. The other clubs in Dundee would run those. In Perth, in Montrose, in Forfar, all these little towns round about Dundee would have shows. So you were boxing every week. So that show, 1952, it was in, this is incredible. You've got this research done right down at a T, because I was 7 and my dad said, would you like to box? And there was no kind of rules that would stop you. I think nowadays you have to be 12. I'm not sure.
I think it might be about...
There were no kind of rules that would stop you. So what he did was, there was another a boy from another club, same age, same size. Let's put them on there. It was like a warm up before a cabaret artist would come on. It was 2 7-year-old boys who knew how to dance about and who knew a bit about boxing. Let them in the ring, and the audience loved it. So it's probably only about 250 people, 300 people in this. It was the canteen of a jute mill. And Dundee was the city of jute, jam, and journalism. At one time, Dundee had 100 jute mills. So this was the canteen of a jute mill, which had been hired for the night. We got in there, and it was great. So at the end, the referee held, it was a draw. There are no draws, as you know, in amateur boxing, but they announced it was a draw, and they raised. What a thrill that was! I mean, that was great. But you know, equally thrilling was me being around the senior boxers, guys I looked up to, Dick McTaggart. And he's a teenager at that time, and I'm looking up to these guys. So, and that was the same with the boxing club. When I went there, I'm 4.5. I started. My mum would say to my dad, "Boxing club tonight. Take Frankie." That's what they call me. Take Frankie. So I would go down to the boxing club, just being there, watching, putting a pair of gloves on, punching the bag on, and so it was all kind of instilled in me from an early age, and the right way to do it and the wrong way to do it. Yeah, 100%. Exactly.
I was going to ask, I found this, like, when I was researching you met Sugar Ray Robinson as well.
Yeah.
I was going to say, what was that like? So I've always, there's not a lot of footage on Sugar Ray, but what you hear, like, the Raging Bull and Jake LaMotta, that story, the rivalry. Then he went, like, was it 89-0 after he lost that fight? Something just mad he went. So yeah, I'd love to hear about that.
Well, you can find more on Sugar Ray on YouTube. I mean, the Jake LaMotta fight's on YouTube, I think, and you get clips of them. The Gene Fulmer fight and all these. They're a remarkable fighter. So I grew up
on that era
as a kid thinking Sugar Ray is just like a god,
100%. Yeah.
So 1964, I'm round about that, about 15, when I was 15, going on 16, I was boxing in a hall in Fife, Scotland. And on the bill, boxing exhibition bouts, or sparring, was Walter McGowan.
Yeah.
Walter went on to become the world flyweight champion. So I boxed, I won, I came out. And before I could get changed, McGowan's father, who was also his coach and his manager, he called himself Joe Gans. Joe Gans had been a century before, or whatever, I can't remember the time scale, been the world lightweight champion. So Joe Gans came to me that night in Fife after the fight, and he said, do you want to do a couple of rounds with Walter later on? And I said, yeah, fine. My dad was very apprehensive. thinking, no, am I being exploited here? Am I being used?
Yeah.
However, we did it and it was great. It was very exciting, thrilling.
Good spar.
And then after it, Gans said to me, I would like you to be coming through to train with Walter.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did it. And weekends, me and my coach would go through to Hamilton, where he lived, and we'd spar. And then I was 16, 17, and I became his chief sparring partner. And the reason my coach had said to Joe Gans, why are you asking Frank through? And he said, he's the only guy that can make Walter think.
Yeah.
Right. So Walter was beating up lightweights, and I was bantamweight at the time. He was beating up lightweights and light welterweights. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I would bantamweight, and then I went to featherweight. It was still boxing. Mm-hmm. But during those years, I boxed many, many rounds with Walter. He was an exceptional fighter. But then I'd get, and the thinking behind it for Gans, Joe Gans, I later found out was he was grooming me to become a professional.
Yeah.
And I would join Walter with him as the manager. Mm-hmm. But I was never over keen on doing professional. Yeah. It wasn't anything other than, why would I do that? You know, what I was doing was by then I was traveling all over Europe, was boxing for Scotland and so on. Mm-hmm. But then I would get he had me sparring with Bobby Fischer, who was a British title contender at featherweight, and then a guy called Johnny Morrissey, who was a bantamweight, who boxed for the British title. He fought Freddie Gilroy and all these guys. Mm-hmm. So I was gaining so much experience at that time. And actually, in a way, it changed my style. Yeah. Right? It allowed me, and this is what I try to tell amateur boxers now, you don't have to be all over the ring dancing. You know, if a guy throws a punch, you don't have to jump 6 feet away. Yeah. So this is the kind of things I was learning, boxing against the professionals. And then after I'd been in the European Championships, came back, McGowan won the world flyweight title. Mm-hmm. And he was boxing in Paisley Ice Rink, mm-hmm. which was the regular venue for the big boxing matches at that time in Scotland, promoted by a guy called Peter Keenan. Mm-hmm. And McGowan's my father said to me one day, right, next week when you come down on Sunday, don't come here to the gym, go to St. Cuthbert's Church Hall. Yeah. And I said, why? And he said, never mind why, just do it. Just go. So we went there, and the reason was they'd set it up as a boxing gym, punch bags, a ring, and so on. And I'm in there. There was only about 4 of us invited to train. Yeah. And I'd be sparring with Gunn. I was in there putting my wraps on, as they call them now. We didn't call them that. We call them bandages. Yeah. And the door opens, and who walks in? Sugar Ray Robinson. Mm-hmm. And I went, oh, no, I think I'm dreaming here. Now, the reason he was there is because he was on that bill on the Thursday that McGowan was going to be fighting a guy called Kid Solomon. And McGowan and Robinson was fighting Mick Leahy, who was a British middleweight champion. And Robinson comes in and walks up to me, and he was dressed, he was in a black mohair suit, and it's 1964, you know, and I'm thinking, what? I was 18, and he came over, he said, hi, I'm Ray, and I said, I'm Frank, Frankie. Frank, oh, it's great to see you, and he chatted away for a couple of minutes. Then we went into the hall to train, and I'm on the punch bag, and he's next to me. And he's speaking, everything fine, bang, bang. And then he's going and sparring, and I'm with McGowan sparring, and he's in with his sparring partner, a guy called Milo Calhoun, who traveled with him. I thought, it was just fantastic, because he was my dream fighter. He had everything. You know, he could box, he could fight, he could do all kinds of punching. His repertoire was enormous. And that was a great. I went to the fight, and of course it's so sad because Robinson was 43 at the time.
Yep.
Mick Leahy was not in the same league. He shouldn't be mentioned. He was a nice man, I'm told. Shouldn't be mentioned in the same breath as Sugar Ray Robinson. But Robinson was fighting. If you look at his record, I can't remember off the top of my head, but something like 16. Hang on, something like 10 fights in 9 months, or something.
Yeah,
he was all over Europe because he needed the money. He had the tax man to pay off. He needed to. But that was a thrill. It was a great night.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I think just to round this off, I think that was a brilliant story. I was going to ask, so when you was 22, you had around 200 amateur fights in total you had, but you decided to sort of stop boxing. I was going to ask why, and you touched on like about being a professional, and you didn't really want to turn over. So I was just going to ask why you decided to think that's it for me in boxing.
Well, going back to the turning professional thing, I was when McGowan won the world title, the Daily Record newspaper in Scotland staged a big dinner with invited guests to mark his achievement. And I was there. And I'm at a table with a heap of professional boxers. John Cowboy McCormack, who won the British middleweight title, beating Terry Downs and then lost it again. John O'Brien, who was a European featherweight champion, and I think Chick Calderwood was there. He boxed for the world light heavyweight title. He was certainly a top contender. There was a lot of Scottish professional boxers at the table. Our table was hosted by Peter Keenan. Keenan was the top promoter, and he was part of the cartel, if you like, of Harry Levine, Mickey Duff, Mike Barrett, who they promoted the big fights in England, and Keenan was their man, if you like, in Scotland. So Keenan's sitting there, and he was a great character, Keenan, and a brilliant man, full of sparkle. You know, he'd been a British Empire and European bantamweight champion in the 1950s. So he says to me, and it wasn't a question, he said to me, "Right, Frank, here's how it is. You'll be managed by Al Phillips in London. You'll box for Levine, Duff, and Barrett in London and in England generally, and you'll box for me up in Scotland. So we'll get all that deal done." And I said, "Hang on a second. I haven't been asked." No, he just assumed.
Yeah,
just assumed it was going to happen. So he said, that's what's going to happen. And I said, "Nah, hang on." And that's when it kind of clicked. And my dad he never said to me, "You're not turning professional."
Yeah.
But he didn't encourage me to do it.
Yeah.
He just encouraged me to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember turning to Keenan and saying, "Peter, that's really nice of you." I said, "But I look around the table here, all these star boxers.
Yeah.
And the one that's wearing the mohair suit and smoking the Havana cigar and drinking the Napoleon brandy is the promoter."
Yeah.
And I said, "I think I'll pass on that."
Oh,
and he said, "What? He couldn't believe it, you know? I thought you'd be." I said, "I think I'll, you know."
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a kind of first time. And then from then on, because believe me, at the age of 16, 17, up to 19, my whole ethos was, I'm going to turn professional. I'm going to be a British champion. But then, when you think about it, I grew up with all these professional boxers around me. We used to have pro boxers coming to our gym to train, and you'd look at them and think, and the older guys, you think, he's not quite right. We should call it punchy. But now we know better. Yeah. And so I thought, no, I'll pass on that one. And so by the time I was 21, 22, I was beginning to lose. There was other things that were going on in my life. I sang in a pop band for a year.
Yeah.
I was training to be a journalist. I was a news reporter on a weekly paper. Then I went to become a news reporter on a regional paper, a daily paper. And then, by the time I thought, I'm going to put all my heart and soul into my job. And that's what I did. And so I would never encourage anybody to turn professional because there are too many examples out there, far too many, where you see they end up with hardly any money.
Yeah.
The guys making the money are the managers and the promoters, and this bizarre thing they've got now where a manager and a promoter are one and the same person.
Yeah.
You know, that never used to be. So who's looking out for the boxer? The managers and promoters, and I'll be outspoken here, they're looking after themselves. How can I exploit this guy and build him up to be a champion and make money from him? 100%. And what about their well-being? Well, that comes secondary.
Yeah. I mean, I think boxing, unfortunately, has told that tale. I think we've seen, obviously, a very famous one. Probably won't interview him, so I can say it. Don King in like you had. I'm not too familiar with what happened with Muhammad Ali, but I know there was a bit there. But then the Tyson story, and then Roberto Duran and the Sugar Ray Leonard rematch, and he cut all that weight. So the tales are telling. I think even in modern boxing, there was a few things said with some fighters, and I think it showed now that when they're a free agent, look how well they're doing, and they couldn't make the fight, rather get the big fights under a certain person. So.
Yeah, well, it's funny you should say that because I remember having a conversation with Buchanan after he'd beaten Ismael Laguna to win the world title in Puerto Rico, I think.
Yeah.
And I said to him, it was a bit cheeky of me, I said, how much did you get for that? How much were you paid? I can't remember what year we were talking about, 75, thereabouts. And he said, I got £4,000, right? And then he said, after he finished the fight, he said his promoter was Jack Solomon's.
Yeah.
And Jack Solomon and his wife was there, and Eddie Thomas and his wife, Eddie Thomas was his manager. They were there. He said they went off to Mexico for a week's holiday, the four of them, with some of Buchanan's money, right? And he said, I said, how much did you end up with? He said, I had to pay tax. I had to pay my flight and accommodation off the fee, flight and accommodation. He had training camp a couple of weeks before the fight. That all had to be paid for.
Yeah.
And he said, I ended up with nothing.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a salutary tale.
Yeah.
And on how professional boxing. Now, we're off the scale in terms of the kind of money they can make these days.
Yeah.
But if these guys are not careful, and if they haven't got people that they can trust around them, then a lot of this will just fly out the window.
100%. I think Derek Chisora had like a very similar story. I think they offered him a fight. It was quite a few years ago. I think it was like, he said, if I get 250 grand for this fight, 100 of it's going to be gone when I get taxed or something like that. I think he said 60. Then he goes with between his training camp, his trainers, sparring partners, he'll have spent a good 120 grand. So then he's not getting his money's worth when he's fighting.
No.
I'm pretty sure it was a big fight at that time. I can't remember the exact stories, but yeah, it was definitely.
But you're right. If people think, wow, look at the money he's going to get, but actually, what do they end up with?
Yeah,
it's a fraction of what the purse is. Meanwhile, the guys who are making all the dosh, who are not actually taking the hits, taking the punches, are the promoters and the managers.
100%. Oh well, Frank, I just want to say thank you for your time, and it's been honestly really, really. It's been brilliant to discuss boxing with you. And if you want to shout out your TikTok, just go for it in your boxing gloves. Show them off, and then I'll give it an ending there.
That'll be really nice of you, Christian. And thanks. I love talking boxing. In fact, I love talking old style boxing and the old stories. That's what gets me. And the thing is, if I can
go for it.
get some people to recognize in the boxing game, we really have to get back to the basics.
100%.
We've moved to a position in boxing, in terms of the coaching, where it's not real. But listen, I really appreciate your time and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Frank. This has been KRS Boxing out.